constitutional excellence. I'm Vicki Wilkins. I'm the Dean of the School of Public Affairs, and I'm so thrilled that you joined me and my partner here, David Skaggs, who served in the U.S. House of Representatives from Colorado 1987 to 1999. David and his wife Laura approached distinguished professor Jim Thurber, who I know is here in the room, in 2017 to talk about the possibility of establishing a prize to celebrate those who respect the institutional values of Congress and the need for compromise in a democratic society. Through our Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies, directed by David Barker, we made this gift happen here in the School of SPA. I want to recognize Jim and David for all the help they provided in getting us to this event this evening. And to David and Laura, thank you for your vision and for your generosity in endowing this prize. While many of us grumble and renounce the lack of legislative compromise, you did something about it and established an award that does two important things. One, we celebrate the collaborative work of two members of Congress. And two, the gift will provide a donation to an organization working to advance constitutional understanding and civic education. This year, our winners have allowed the university to choose an organization to receive this monetary award. And I'm proud to announce that the $3,000 in prize money will be donated to the Thomas S. Foley Institute of Public Policy and Public Service at Washington State University. Yes. I got the honor of making the call to their director, Cornell Clayton, to let him know about the award. He was thrilled and honored to receive the donation and to be part of this prize. He wanted me to send more information so he could make sure to spread the word there about the good work we're doing here at American University. At the School of Public Affairs, it's in our DNA to promote legislative compromise and bipartisanship and civil discourse. These are all at the core of our democracy and necessary elements for our students and partners to embrace. And we are thrilled to be here partnering with you, David, and so grateful for the work that you and Laura have done to bring this to fruition. I now want to give you a moment to let people know about your vision and thoughts for the award. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Vicki. Thanks to all of you for being here tonight. A few special thank yous to American University for agreeing to be the home of the Madison Prizes, to President Burwell and Dean Wilkins for embracing the project, to Jim Thurber and David Barker. Hi, David. The emeritus and current directors of the Center for the Study of Congress and the Presidency here at AU, to Senator Alexander and his colleague, Senator Murray, who couldn't be here tonight, as the recipients of the first Madison Prizes for demonstrating the virtue and the value of compromise. And to my dear wife, Laura, my partner in life and in the Madison Prizes adventure, and of course to James Madison, without whom we might not have a Constitution to celebrate. And Laura reminds me to Dolly Madison, without whom James wouldn't have been anybody. And I must say it was really my long friendship and admiration for Jim Thurber that made Laura and me approach American University to do this, so thanks again to Jim. All of us who did and still do hold public office have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. The Madison Prizes are about holding up the Constitution, both to those who presently serve under it and to the young people in the country who need to learn about it and understand it. So what is this all about? Why the Madison Prizes? Why celebrate compromise these days? Laura and I hope that the prizes serve a couple of different purposes. First, we want to recognize and honor the practice of compromise and its essential place in our constitutional system. Second, as Vicki said, we want to channel some additional resources to support civic education, asking the prize recipients to suggest an organization which is at least partly in the business of civic education. So why is compromise so important? We're all familiar with the core principles of checks and balances and separation of powers. a brilliant political construct, but one we sometimes forget that was intended to make it hard to abuse power by making it hard to make law. Madison was a realist about power and human nature, and he explained in Federalist 51 how it was supposed to work, and I quote, "So contriving the interior structure of the government so that its several constituent parts may, by their mutual relations, be the means of keeping each other in their proper places, giving to those who administer each department, think of Congress, the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachment of the others." And the famous Madisonian phrase, "Ambition must be made to counteract ambition." The separation of powers among the coordinate branches of government formed the structural basis for the checks on power, checks that were meant to ensure the balance of powers, a constitutional architecture that requires its actors to compromise in order to get anything done. So we want to hold up Senators Alexander and Murray as exemplars of what I think of as the sacred art of compromise. The prizes are meant to honor those, like them, excuse me a second, those in Congress who have shown how important compromise is. Our constitutional structure depends on it. We need to appreciate the work of compromise, not disparage it. However, too many in American political life these days do disparage compromise and do not appreciate it. In this regard, sadly, those in office often respond to the cues they get from home. This stems, at least in part, I think, from the neglect over a couple of generations of civic education in the schools. There are lots of reasons for this, but there is no adequate justification. If we had an electorate more literate about our constitutional structure, they would better understand the requirement for compromise envisioned and prescribed by the founders. They knew that an educated citizenry was needed for the new democracy to work. That was a key reason for establishing a system of free public education. The neglect of civic education correlates to an unintended spread of civic illiteracy in the country. That has resulted in an electorate all too susceptible to the pandering of left or right, candidates who appeal for their votes that dismiss the need for compromise and pretend that you can have it your own way. That in turn leads to inevitable disappointments and cynicism. As Madison might have said, the remedy for this is in part the restoration of civic education to its deserved place in the curriculum. That obviously is a long-term proposition requiring patient political capital, largely at the state and local level. We hope the notice that the Madison Prizes may attract and the modest funding that will flow into civic education as a result may encourage both those serving in Congress now and those learning about Congress in the schools in the future. Encourage them to see the value, not necessarily in splitting differences, but in actually overcoming and resolving them. That's the central responsibility of Republican government. Back in my first few terms in the House, when the Democrats were in the majority, I often had the privilege of being asked to chair debate. It was a kick to stand there gavel in hand and to try to manage the proceedings of the People's House, much rowdier, of course, Senator, than your body. I would sometimes imagine the spirits of James Madison or Thomas Jefferson standing in the back of the chamber, taking stock of their work. As my friends here at AU have probably become tired of hearing from me, the model for the requisite small r Republican conduct was set out by Madison in Federalist 10. So bear with me with another extensive Madison quote. A republic, a government in which the scheme of representation takes place, promises the cure for what we are seeking: the delegation of government to a small number of citizens elected by the rest. The effect is to refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country and whose patriotism and love of justice will be least likely to sacrifice it to temporary or partial considerations. Unquote. What a beautiful homage to the ideal of representative democracy and the proper, expected, necessary role of representatives. So let us honor James Madison tonight. He embedded in the Constitution a realism about politics and human nature. So with luck and determination, we might have optimism about the nation. Thank you.
And now for the awarding of the prizes. I want to take one moment to thank our Madison Prize Selection Committee. I know some are with us tonight. Gina Adams, Sarah Bender, Mickey Edwards, Ron Elving, Connie Morella, and Jim Thurber. Thank you all for your hard work in reviewing nominations and helping us select a winner. Now on to the winners. Tonight we are thrilled to honor Senator Lamar Alexander and Senator Patty Murray. The senators' work together exemplifies how Madison envisioned the responsibility of elected representatives to respect the public interest and to seek greater good. That approach was central to their collaborative efforts, resulting in the passage of the 21st Century Cures Act and the Support Act, legislation that took steps to tackle hard-to-treat diseases, confront the opioid epidemic, strengthen mental health care, and advance medical innovation. It's also informed their efforts to strengthen the individual market and reduce premiums for those insured under the Affordable Care Act. In 2018, the senators worked together to pass a bill through the Senate to simplify both student financial aid application and the process of loan repayment, known as the Faster Access to Federal Student Aid Act. We'd like to have Senator Alexander come up for the award. Senator Lamar Alexander is a seventh-generation Tennessean, not Texan. Ooh, that was a bad slip. Ooh, sorry.
We founded Texas.
He was.
Probably did.
Yes. He was twice elected governor of Tennessee. He's always believed in that in most cases, the best decisions are made by those closest to the people. Today, Senator Alexander chairs the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Senator Alexander is also the chairman of the Senate Energy and Water Development Appropriations Subcommittee, where he works to boost funding for basic energy research and invest in our inland waterways and harbors. Alexander was first elected to the Senate in 2002 and has been re-elected twice. His Republican colleagues elected him 3 times to be the chair of the Senate Republican Conference. He previously served as the president of the University of Tennessee and as the U.S. Secretary of Education under George H.W. Bush. He is a classical and country pianist and the author of 7 books. Lamar Alexander and his wife, Honey, which I love that name, have 4 children and 8 grandchildren, and my favorite part of your bio, a dog named Rufus. So we thank you and we recognize you here tonight for all your great work on compromise and bipartisanship.
Thank you very much.
It's heavy. I will warn you.
David, you want to come over here?
Yes, David, thank you.
You may not remember, but I came to your office years ago pushing civic education. Okay, one more.
Thank you.
Oh,
We got a camera. We got a phone.
bingo.
I'll take this back. It's very
Thank you
heavy.
very
I'll let
much.
you.
You have a seat up here, sir. Okay, let me just sit here.
Next, we have our president, Sylvia Burwell, who will be receiving the award for Senator Patty Murray. Senator Murray has been a proven track record spanning more than 2 decades of fighting for Washington state families in the United States Senate. Serving as a member of the Senate Democratic leadership since 2007, Senator Murray has established herself as a tireless and effective leader on education, transportation, budget issues, port security, health care, women, and veterans issues. In addition to being the first female senator from Washington State, Senator Murray served as the first female chair of the Senate Veterans Committee during the 112th Congress and served as the first female chair of the Senate Budget Committee during the 113th Congress. She is currently the ranking member of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. She was born and raised in Bothell, did I say that right, Jim? Washington, and she's married to Rob Murray, and it has 2 grown children, and she enjoys fishing, exploring Washington State's great outdoors, and spending time with her family. Due to her schedule, she's unable to be with us here this evening, and so President Burwell will be receiving upon her behalf. And now, you're going to
Sure we need to.
I might draw that. And now I'm going to turn the stage over for something very exciting, a conversation between our president, Sylvia Burwell, and Senator Alexander. For those of you who do not know, Sylvia Burwell is the 15th president of American University. She held 2 cabinet positions in the U.S. government, leading Health and Human Services 2014 to 2017, and the Office of Management and Budget from 2013 to 2014. In both roles, she was known as a leader who would work successfully across the aisle and focus on delivering results for American people.
Thank you so much, Vicki, and thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm going to do a few questions with us together, and then we'll open Better. I'll do a few questions and then we'll open it up to others. But first, I want to start by thanking you for coming, and not just for coming and receiving the award, but for all the work that we did together, as well as all the advice. And I'll just share quickly 2 stories about that advice. So when I was thinking about the idea of becoming a university president, I don't know if you remember this phone call, I called. And I called the chairman and I said, you know, thinking about this and would love your counsel. And what you said was, I've been a governor. I have been a senator. It is unique to be a university president.
I actually said, Sylvia, people often ask me, what's harder, being a governor, a cabinet member, a United States senator, or a university president? And my answer always is, obviously, you've never been a university president, or you wouldn't ask a dumb question like that.
That is exactly what he said. I cleaned it up a little bit. But that is, and as I found with all of your advice and different things, you've been right, Mr. Chairman. It is not. The second thing I would just say in terms of that advice and counsel, and it actually translates to the topic we're going to talk about tonight. When I became secretary at HHS, we had the chance to work together when I was at OMB, but when I became secretary, it was a pretty contentious time, if we reflect back at that point in time, with regard to the issues surrounding the Affordable Care Act and a number of other things. I believed, and I actually believed when I came back to government, I am a believer we can work together and we can get things done. And so I wanted to create something that could help with that. And so I created what we called the Common Ground Breakfast. But before I did it, and the idea was that every about 2 months, 6 weeks to 2 months, we would have a breakfast. And it would be a breakfast where it would be all of HHS's authorizers and appropriators from both sides of the aisle and both bodies. A very unusual gathering. And so I called the chairman and I said, what do you think? Because I couldn't do it and it wouldn't work if I didn't have some anchor of support. And I will tell you that the chairman was there for every single breakfast. And we have, I don't know if you remember the one with Orrin Hatch and Rosa DeLaura sitting beside each other, discussing issues. The only ground rules were It was a common ground breakfast, and we would be discussing the issues that would move the nation forward. We would not be focusing on the things that we had deep, deep disagreements. And we spent time on a number of the issues that were stated as part of the things that we would move forward. And your dedication and commitment to being there, to being present, and to driving those conversations, not just to conversations, but actual reality, is a part of why we're here tonight. And I'm very thankful, and I know the American people are thankful. And I think that will lead us to some questions about that. So when you think about this, because you do it time and time again, how do you pick an issue to choose to move the ball forward? You are very careful and are very successful in finding the issues and the spaces where you can move things forward. How do you pick them?
Well, first, thank you. And let me say to Sylvia, it's a privilege tonight and to have worked with her. I always felt like my job, and I told her this often, I said, I feel like my job is to create an environment in which you can succeed. Remember that? And that might sound to some people, well, wait a minute, she's Obama's secretary, but of course that didn't matter. When I was elected governor of Tennessee, I was a young Republican governor in a sea of Democrats, and they asked the big old House Speaker, Ned McWhorter, what are you going to do with this new young Republican governor? And he said, I'm going to help him, because if he succeeds, the state succeeds. And that's not a naive thing to say. That's actually the way it's supposed to work, and often does work. So how do I pick an issue? Well, one, it needs to be important. It needs to be capable of a bipartisan solution, so you can get a result. People often say, well, you know, your focus is compromise, your focus is civility, your focus is et cetera. That's not my focus. My focus is a result. And the founders that David talked about create an environment where you can't get a result unless you work with other people. I mean, unless you can count. For example, I learned to count in public schools, so if I need to get 60 votes in the Senate, that means I can't only work with Republicans, or we've got a House of Democrats, or then I've got to work with them. So, and Senator McConnell will often say that to me. He said it again to me today. He said, look, I don't want to spend the whole year just confirming nominees. He said, if you've got something that's bipartisan and important, well, we'll put it on the floor. So in looking for that, I'll give you an example of fixing No Child Left Behind. One reason we did that was because everybody wanted it fixed. That was in 2015. So there was enough support. Governors and teachers unions would all agree, so it was ripe. So ripeness is one thing. Although Arnie Duncan, who was President Obama's education secretary, said he thought after we did it, my chances were maybe 10-1 against doing it, but it was ripe to do. And it was capable of bipartisan support because the teachers unions, as well as the governors, wanted the law fixed. So there was outside support for Democrats as well as for Republicans. 21st Century Cures was one you mentioned. I won't go into much detail, but so you can get to a second question. But that bill was already percolating in the House. And maybe I will tell you a little bit of a story about that. May I do that?
Please.
Here's how that worked. So I go in January of 2015 to Knoxville with President Obama. He's going to talk about free community college. And on the way down, I say to him, Mr. President, I'm trying to fix No Child Left Behind, and I've got a request. Will you not oppose what I'm trying to do while I'm trying to do it? And he said, well, I said, if you do that, I'll bring you a bill that you can sign. So the end result was he did that. I was working through all these issues, and he didn't put out any statements that I'll veto this if you do that and all that kind of thing. But halfway through, he called Senator Murray and me down to the White House and said he wanted 3 things. I said, okay, Mr. President, I'll bring you those 3 things. I could bring you 2 of them in the bill, and then the third will have to come in conference, but I won't bring you a bill without the 3 things in it. And I did in December of 2015. He called it a Christmas miracle, and walking out, he said, well, you kept your word, and I said, you did too. So that's how that worked. On that same trip to Knoxville, we had lunch, and he had been talking with his own physician about precision medicine, which is only available because of the new genomic research that you can do today. About if you've got cancer, they just don't give you any medicine. They figure out what your genomes are, and then they give you whatever works with that. He was really fascinated with that. So I said, okay, Mr. President, we're working on 21st century cures, so we'll just wrap in your interest in precision medicine to the 21st century cures. He said, okay. And then Joe Biden's son died, and President Obama announced the cancer moonshot and put Joe in charge of it. So we bring in the cancer moonshot to the same thing. And then Mitch McConnell gets interested in regenerative medicine. So we said, okay, Mitch, we'll put that in there too. So we have a lot of interest. In other words, I picked an issue that was there. It was ripe for bipartisan cooperation. I got bipartisan support. And the end of that story is I still was stuck. I actually called Sylvia a number of times about this, and we worked together on it. But at one point, I finally called Joe Biden and said, Mr. Vice President, or I called him Joe, I can't get anybody to give me a yes. So I've got this all worked out. I've got precision medicine for the president and the cancer moonshot for you and regenerative medicine for McConnell, and Paul Ryan's worked out a way to fund it, which nobody else would do. I feel like the butler standing outside the Oval Office with the result on a silver platter, and nobody will open the door and take the order. He said, well, if you want to feel like a butler, try being vice president. But it worked, and the president signed it later in the year, and Senator McConnell said it was the most important bill of that Congress. So that's how I picked the issues: important, ripe, bipartisan, capable of success, and worth doing. And that may sound like a very elementary way to look at things, but often very elementary ways to look at things are the right way, and they don't always work, but they sometimes do.
Are there some key lessons that you've learned from the ones that have worked?
Well, one is pick something that it might actually get done. For example, we fought about Obamacare for 8 years, like the Hatfields and McCoys in Virginia. Nobody could even remember why they were fighting.
West Virginia.
Yeah, and
That's almost
I
like
know,
the Texas,
West
Tennessee
Virginia.
thing, but that's okay.
That's how they do. So what I decided after all that was, in fact, I worked with Sylvia on that. Patty and I had worked out something that was, I thought, perfect policy, and it got scuttled by abortion law. And so what I decided after that was, I'm through with that. I'm not going to work on health insurance this next 2 years. So I moved it to reducing health care costs, because as much as 50% of health care costs are unnecessary. And so Senator Murray and I, and then Senator Grassley and Wyden, who had run the Finance Committee, we're working through a discrete list of specific things on health care costs, like ending surprise medical billings, lower prescription drug costs, getting rid of various gag rules that insurance companies put on employers and pharmacists, people like that. And hopefully we'll be able to report to the Senate floor this summer some bipartisan legislation on reducing health care costs. And what I say to people who ask about health insurance right now, I say, we're never going to have lower cost health insurance until you have lower health care costs. So I've learned, after you beat your head against the wall a while, don't just keep doing it. Adjust your goal until you find something you might actually get done.
That actually brings me to a step that you've taken recently in the healthcare space. And you reached out to both the American Enterprise Institute as well as the Brookings Institution. And they actually produced, you reached out to both sides, and they produced a joint paper. And why did you go to both of the organizations, and have you found what they produced to be helpful in the journey that you're trying to take on healthcare right now?
Well, the answer to the second question is yes. I just did again what you would normally do, I think. If your senators are expected to know a lot about a lot, and we don't. I mean, we might go from what about this nuclear warhead to what about health insurance subsidy? Well, how could we possibly know very much about that? So I thought, if I'm going to be for reducing health care costs in addition to hearings, I'll ask a lot of people who should know what they think. And one way to do that was to write a whole lot of people and ask them, and two respected people were AEI and Brookings. One leans a little left, one leans a little right. Maybe they do or maybe they don't. That's their reputation. And they came back with a lot of very specific proposals. And for example, we had them and a couple of others visit. Patty and I hosted a little coffee for some senators on surprise medical billings. That's when you go to the emergency room and you think it's covered, and then 2 months later you get a bill for $1,500 because the anesthesiologist was not in network. So that's an example.
That's great. Actually, why don't we open it up to folks in the audience who would like to ask any questions? Yes. And if you don't mind introducing yourself. I know who you are, Jim, but.
Okay, I'm Jim Burwell, and it seems to me that you do a great job of reaching out and getting outside groups to agree before you move ahead with a particular idea or bill. And they give cover to both parties. And maybe that's the solution to break through this extreme partisanship and gridlock. In all of those cases, it seems like you've reached out.
Mm-hmm.
Did you think about that strategically, or did it just happen?
No, that's a very important insight, and you're exactly right. I mean, for example, in 21st Century Cures, there already were a lot of people out there working, but I asked Bill Frist to get the Bipartisan Policy Council to stir up all that it could in support of 21st Century Cures. On No Child Left Behind, I mean, I'm having breakfast in the morning with Randy Weingarten. Now, you wouldn't really expect that. I mean, she's the head of the American Federation of Teachers. That's as important a part of the Democratic Party as you're likely to find. But she wanted No Child Left Behind fixed, and we worked very well together. And the National Education Association, which would have strung me up in the 1980s when we passed in Tennessee a program to pay teachers more for teaching well, merit pay, gave me an award along with Patty at the end of fixing No Child Left Behind. So yeah, it's very important to have outside groups. And the reason is because of this. Because this creates an environment that makes it more difficult for university presidents, for presidents of France, for presidents of the United States, and for congressmen, because it creates, human nature hadn't changed, but technology has. So you have these outside forces pushing everything to the extreme on both sides, and you don't have as many powerful forces encouraging a result. So your insight is exactly right.
And I think, Jim, adding on the 21st Century Cures example, on the House side, Michigan, your partner on the House side from Michigan, Fred Upshon actually started the process on the House side with what was not a hearing. He actually started it with a process where it actually was House members asked, would I come? And invited, each member had someone from their district who attached to either precision medicine or one of the issues that would be a part of the bill. And so they had representatives of hospitals, medical centers, and other things, and did that as the initial meeting that they did on the House side in order to bring together, and it was bipartisan. But it was not in a hearing room, which was a very interesting thing because of the way the conversations could occur. Others? Yes, Sydney.
I'm Sydney Garde, a political science student here at American University, and I'm wondering, especially after seeing the gridlock and inability, After seeing the gridlock and inability for Congress to work together around funding this winter, what steps are you going to take in the future to increase bipartisanship across the Senate and the House?
Well, what I do is just what I've been saying. You know, I work with people who, to be specific, I've had a number of discussions with the leadership in both the Senate and the House to try to get, and if this is really wonky, but it's an answer to your question, to get a 302A budget number. In other words, I'm chairman of an appropriations subcommittee. We had a hearing today. We have to know how much money we've got to spend, right? And the presidents always send budgets. With all respect to Sylvia, they always send us budgets that we ignore because they have to do these various things. And so in order to get a 302A budget number, President Trump and the Democrat and Nancy Pelosi and Steny and McConnell and Chuck are going to have to sit down and agree that we're not going to cut all spending by 10% in the next year because of the Budget Control Act, but that we're going to appropriate to this higher level. Now, that's not easier to do, but that's the way it will be done when it's done. And if it's not done, why, things will come to a standstill.
Should we go into earmarks here in terms of helping the appropriations process? We won't discuss.
No, I don't mind that. I mean, what she's talking about is that.
So the question
say what you're talking about.
So right now we're in a situation where, the sequester, the idea that we only have 2 years worth of the overarching number. So to get the number that the chairman was just describing, you've got to have an overarching number agreed upon of the budget that then gets divided into the pieces for the committees. That's the allocation process. And so each time you have to negotiate that and do that part. There are no longer earmarks. When I was at OMB the first time, there were earmarks. Earmarks have come away, and there are different points of view about earmarks as a positive or negative tool in the appropriations process. So, Senator, do you think that the return of earmarks would be something that would help or hinder the overarching budget process?
Well, it would help. But it goes back to David, what the language that David read from Madison. Earmarks are when Congress appropriates money for a specific project. Let me give you an example. Say I'm sitting in my office, and here comes a delegation from Nashville. And they say the Wolf River Dam is in bad shape. And if we have a flood, it's going to flood downtown Nashville. So we need more money than the president has put in his budget to fix the Wolf River Dam. Or maybe the president hadn't put in any money in his budget. All I can say, and this happened when Obama was president, all I can say is, well, that's a real problem, and I hate to hear that Nashville might get flooded. Let me give you President Obama's telephone number because I can't do anything about it. Because the rule is that Congress can't include in its appropriations bill specific projects. Or let's take the Savannah port. Let's say, how would you say?
You know how many hours I spent on that one.
Yeah, well, that's right. But let's take the Savannah port. So the president doesn't put enough money into Savannah port, and we're afraid that the big ships are going to go to Cuba instead of go to the port unless it's deepened. So it's not in Tennessee, so I'm chairman of the subcommittee, so I say, well, I'll put in more money than Sylvia did working down at the Office of Management and Budget. I can't do that.
Fixed before I left.
I can't do that.
This administration undid it.
So she made one misstatement. She said there are no earmarks. One person gets to make earmarks, and that's Sylvia. The head of the president has 800 earmarks in his budget this year, specific projects and numbers. No member of Congress does, because unless it's in the president's budget, you can't put it in the appropriations bill. So I think that goes back to Article 1 of the Constitution, which says that the exclusive power for appropriating dollars is not with the Office of Management and Budget, it's with the Congress. And the purpose of that is to keep the president from having too much power. But members of Congress have gotten afraid of the scandals that were around, and they were, but they can be cured other ways than just giving up your total power to appropriate dollars. That's my view of it.
Why don't we take this right here? Yes. Yeah.
Oh, really? Where are you from?
Knoxville.
Oh, good for you. That's a great
I'm
place.
asking a question on behalf of a fellow member of the School of Public Affairs Leadership Program. We're both political science students, and we're also involved with the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program here at
Okay.
AU. And so she wanted me to ask, this is the premise, according to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, women are 500% more likely to be killed in a domestic violence situation when there's a gun in the home or owned by the abuser. Sorry, deep breath. So, therefore, would you be open to committing to closing the boyfriend loophole within the Violence Against Women Act? I'm so sorry, nervous public
no,
speaking.
that's all right. Take your time. We got.
Okay. Also, I've never spoken with a senator before, so
Look,
thank you.
senators
Very
are
excited.
senators are a dime a dozen. So don't
Okay.
we're nothing special. So
Oh, you should know your worth. So I'll pose it again. My friend would like to know if you would commit to closing the boyfriend loophole within the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization of 2019.
I don't know because I haven't studied that and I haven't heard both sides of the issue. So since you brought it up with me, I will go back to my office and David Cleary, my chief of staff's back there listening, and I'll take a look at it. But I don't want to answer it and mislead you into thinking I'll take this position or that position without knowing.
Thank you for that very candid response.
Thank
that
you.
was a very good one. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Connie has a question.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Senator, congratulate you. I want to congratulate in absentia Senator Murray.
Thank you,
and, of course,
Connie.
And being here with the president of American University and Dave Skaggs. But you are a great example of bipartisanship, and you've given us examples of it, and Sylvia has confirmed it. But I wonder, what would you tell these young people about what you suggest to try to remedy, as James Madison said, the various factions, that end up being against each other? We see it mostly on the House side, where you've got a Freedom Caucus and then the ultimate progressive, whatever it's called, and they don't know each other, they don't work together. What suggestions would you offer this group, what could be done to bring about more bipartisanship that you show?
Well, I think I wouldn't make your goal bipartisanship. Make your goal getting a result. And then bipartisanship is how you get there. And being civil with somebody is how you get there. And if you're trying to get a result, I mean, like Patty Murray, if she were here to defend herself, she would agree. She's not easy to get a result with. But I know that if I get an agreement with her, we can get it done. She's a member of the Democratic leadership. She has all these constituents that she has to deal with just like I do. So we have to trust each other. So we've gotten to know each other, and I don't surprise her. That's one thing. But what could students do? The most effective lobbying, and there's nothing wrong with lobbying if you've got a point of view about the Violence Against Women's Act, is to find the representative from your hometown and get about 10 or 20 people together and invite that person to come spend 30 minutes with you and ask them the question. Now, if they come out to American University, and where's your home? You're from Indiana and you're from Knoxville. Well, see, they're not going to pay as much attention to you because they're not from South Bend. I might pay attention to her because she's from Tennessee. But if you have, when I was governor, I was trying to pass something one day, and we got the cabinet together and we all agreed to do it, and it didn't get done. And I finally realized that the way to get it done was to get 10 people from the legislator's hometown to ask the legislator to come meet with them and to ask them to do something, and often they would do it. So that's the same thing as the American Federation of Teachers working with a Democratic member whom they've supported in a campaign. It's the same thing as Vanderbilt University working on the 21st Century Cures Bill with senators from Tennessee, but they'll have more influence on senators from Tennessee than they will on senators from Indiana. So I would suggest in your hometowns, you pick an issue, try to get a result, and ask to see your elected representative personally with a group of people. Get 10 or 15.
I would just add, in terms of a point that you made, Mr. Chairman, is the issue of trust and relationship. That was the objective of the breakfasts. That was it, as much as making substantive headway, is returning to a place of trust and relationships. And as students here at American University, I think you all know, and actually have even heard from me today, about the importance of dialogue and civil discourse about issues, and a willingness for us to sit down and listen to each other and hear and think the best, not the worst, which is what a relationship of trust brings you. And in the issues where, Senators Alexander and Murray have worked together, if you look at the Ryan-Murray deal, which was the first deal to break through the sequester, that was actually because Paul Ryan and Patty Murray came to a relationship of trust. And trust isn't always that, like, you think you're the best, you're going to be best friends, but it is about respect and relationship. Look at the first time since 1987 that a total appropriations bill, that means all the bills for all the committees, was done together since 1987, was Rogers Mikulski. And that fell on the heels of Ryan Murray. And that is a relationship. Barbara Mikulski and Hal Rogers had a relationship of trust. It's what you just said. They don't surprise. They trust that you can deliver, willing to have the right conversations. And I think you all as students here today need to learn that. You need to learn that to try and get things done in government. We need to help you model that and give you the skills and the tools, because whether it's here or in the business community or in your life, these are the key skills that you need to succeed as a citizen and professionally.
Let me tell you a story about that. I came to Washington to work with Senator Howard Baker, who was from Tennessee this years ago, and two things. He suggested that the skill of being a senator was to be an eloquent listener. Because he said sometimes what someone's saying to you isn't really what they're saying to you. You have to listen very closely to hear what they're really trying to say to you. And I love the idea of being an eloquent listener. And an example of what Sylvia just said about trust was 1980, when President Reagan was elected, suddenly Senator Robert Byrd of Sylvia's home state was the minority leader instead of the majority leader. And Senator Baker was the majority leader. And Baker went to see Byrd and said, "Bob, I'll never learn the Senate rules as well as you know them. I'll make a deal with you. I won't surprise you if you won't surprise me." And Senator Byrd said, "Let me think about it." And the next morning he called him up and he agreed, and they worked for 4 years on that basis and were very effective as leaders of the Senate.
I think we have time for 2 more questions right over here, and then we'll come to you. This gentleman right here.
Good evening, President Burwell, Senator Alexander. My name is Alex, and I'm an undergrad in the School of International Service here. My Congresswoman is Mary Gay Scanlon on the House Judiciary Committee, and one of her big issues right now is focused on H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which H.R. 1, the For the People Act.
What is that?
It's a lot. It's gerrymandering, voting rights, campaign finance, and
I don't know what all the House bills are. You know, they
understood.
So, but thank you for the question.
It passed in the House pretty strictly along party lines, and Mitch McConnell is refusing to bring it up on the Senate floor. And since this award ceremony is in the interest of bipartisanship, I was wondering about your thoughts as to the climate today and this blatant refusal to work across party lines in trying times.
Well, what Mitch McConnell said to me as recently as today at lunch is if it's important to the country And if it's bipartisan, I'll put it on the floor. Now, is this a bipartisan bill? No. So they need to do some work to get some Republican support in the House for their bill, and then maybe they could bring it up in the Senate.
I do think it is a bill that is well-intentioned for the people of the United States.
Right, that's your point of view, but apparently no Republican was persuaded of that. So I've got a lot of points of view that Patty doesn't agree with, or vice versa, and I might be right or she might be right, but we're not going to get it on the floor if we don't agree. So we've got to either ditch it or find some parts of what she wants to do and some parts of what I want to do that we can agree on and put on the floor. So I'd say maybe H.R. 1's a good first step, but if they want to pass it, you're not going to pass a bill like that. It has no Republican support. If you've got a Republican president and a Republican Senate, that's not a good way to get started, I don't think, whatever the merits of it are.
Why don't we go to the last question.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Rob Mulford. I'm a sophomore here at AU, studying journalism.
Where are you from?
I'm from New York, Syracuse, New York.
Good.
As a journalist major, how do you think the media is either helping or hurting trying to get a bipartisanship bill passed?
Well, it depends on how you define media.
Television broadcast, news articles, all that good stuff.
Well, you just have to be selective. I mean, this is media in a way. That doesn't help much. I mean, if all you do is watch one side of the issue all the time, it's going to be hard to know how to get two sides together. So I think what I try to do, and I think what others try to do, is try to find articles or commentary or individuals who can give you some straight information and not be too influenced by those in the media of whatever form of media who've sort of already got their mind made up when they start to report the news. That's not too new. I mean, 50 years ago, the newspapers were like that. We didn't have cable television, and we didn't have radio talk shows of the kind we have today. But the newspapers we had a big Democratic paper in Nashville, and we had a big Republican paper, and you couldn't believe much of what either one said on the front page. So you look for other sources. For example, what I'm doing on this reducing healthcare costs, I try to have conversations with individuals for 30 or 45 minutes who know what they're talking about. Or Senator Murray and I actually had a meeting today with a group of accreditors on our higher education bill that we're trying to pass to learn more about it. And the two of us had a similar meeting earlier this week on Title IX and campus safety to try to figure out if you learn more about an issue, sometimes you resolve the issues because they're not issues. So I think it's a matter of being selective, and maybe you have to reach out and try to find people who actually know what they're talking about and don't have such an axe to grind, or at least will say, this is my view, but now the other view is X, and I want you to know both sides.
I think as our students are thinking about journalism and communications, that importance of the issue of proximity to the substance, which I think is what the senator's saying, but I also think that there is a question that journalists today, whether broadcast or print, have to face, which is, where should you draw your line between supply and demand? And by that, I mean, what is the product you are trying to produce versus perhaps what the product is being demanded? Because when we fall prey sometimes to the demand of things that are short, concise, you sometimes can't get to the substance, or what will get clicks versus what is the role that journalism should play in informing, which sometimes takes more time and sometimes may not be quite as popular. And so I think that is an important struggle that, as you all are working and going to be the leaders and the journalists of tomorrow, that one needs to think pretty carefully about. want to say thank you so much after an evening and a full day, and the lunches, the votes, everything that you have done today. We're so appreciative that you were willing to come and spend time with us.
Thank you very much. And thanks to the Skaggs for what you've done.